Welcome to XYPN Radio, where your host Alan Moore brings you into a community of fee-only financial planners who want to profitably and successfully serve Gen X and Gen Y clients. If you're ready to get the knowledge you need from leaders in your field, learn from forward-thinking advisors, and take action on your own goals, XYPN Radio is the show for you. Here's your host.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of XYPN Radio. I am your host, Alan Moore, and today I'm very excited to have Meg Bartelt, founder of Flow Financial Planning, on the show today. Meg just wrapped up her first year in business and has been extremely influential in the XYPN community throughout this last year. Meg transitioned into financial planning after spending the first part of her career as a technical writer for technology companies, along with several other tech-related jobs. She got her master's in financial planning and moved from California back home to Virginia to work with an older advisor that was willing to sell her firm to Meg. After the first year, however, it became apparent that the differences in investing styles was going to be an issue, so the firm ended up being sold to a local planning firm where Meg continued to work for another year. She ended up making the move to Washington State to open her own RIA focused on women in tech. She had a slower start than she hoped for, and about 6 months into running her business, fell into what she calls the pit of despair. But through her work with a therapist, a business coach, and also a very supportive husband, she kept putting one foot in front of the other and has started ramping up very quickly. So quickly, in fact, that she isn't taking on new clients till September. One big focus of this interview is her realization that taking care of herself, both physically and mentally, is so important that it needs to come first and the business comes second. I couldn't agree more. Meg was willing to open up about the difficulties of her first year, and I can't thank her enough for being so open and vulnerable. You're not going to want to miss a bit of this episode. This month's episodes are brought to you by RICP. RICP provides innovative financial planning software that digitizes and redefines the financial planning experience. RICP was ranked as the highest user-rated financial planning software in the 2017 annual software survey conducted by T3, Tech Hub, and Inside Information, and was recently added as part of XYPN's technology package, making it free for XYPN members. Sign up for a demo today at writecapital.com and mention the XYPN Radio podcast to be eligible for 10% off retail pricing. You can find any of the additional resources that we mentioned during the episode at xyplanningnetwork.com/105. Also, be sure to go to xyplanningnetwork.com/VIP to join our private group just for XYPN Radio listeners. It's the community of advisors we've all been looking for that's there to provide support when we need it the most. Best of all, it's free. I encourage you to check it out. Again, that's xyplanningnetwork.com/VIP. Without further ado, here's my interview with Meg. Hey, Meg, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for being on.
Thanks, Alan. It is lovely to be here.
Yeah, so one of my most embarrassing professional experiences was on stage at XYPN 16. You received an award, and I totally butchered your last name, thinking I had been practicing it in my head. So I will let you tell the audience how to pronounce your last name so I don't sound like the idiot.
Sure. My last name is Bartelt. It's exactly how it's spelled.
I know, and yet I think I said Bartel. I think that's the Bartelt. And so it's funny because back in episode 1, I think the number one takeaway from my interview with Michael Kitsis was how to pronounce his last name. I think we have increased the percentage of people that pronounce Kitsis correctly by at least 50%, and we will get Bartelt pronounced correctly by another 50%. So
when I'm as famous as Michael, I feel as if this will come in very handy.
That's right. And we can go back and share. If when in doubt, listen to the first minute of XYPN Radio. So thank you again for taking the time to be on. I'm really excited because you are just over a year in your business and have just, I think, absolutely killed it and have just done a lot of really cool things that we don't see from a lot of advisors in their first year. So I'm really excited to dive into that. So take me back through sort of your path into financial planning. Sort of what was your career, or I guess career plans throughout college and getting into your professional career?
Sure. I had no career plans in college. When it came time to interview in senior year, I went to Wellesley College, and one of the things they do really well is attract potential employers to campus. And so I interviewed at a bunch of companies, including Goldman Sachs, which did not want me, which at this point I'm very thankful about. But I was also graduating in 1998, which is smack in the middle of the first dot-com boom. And so there was basically this tendency to like, can you fog a mirror? Well, then you can work in the tech industry. I don't care what your background is. And, my background, I got a degree in economics from a liberal arts college. So, I can think pretty well. So I got hired by an IT consulting firm out in the Bay Area to do God knows what. And so I moved out there in 98, and then I was in the tech industry for the next 12 years or so, working, business analyst and eventually a technical writer for most of my career in the tech industry. And this was just something I followed. I wasn't particularly passionate about any of this stuff. And then I just got really sick of it. I love the people I worked with in the tech industry, but the technology itself, the job itself, did not motivate me at all, ultimately. And then I don't even remember how I figured out that financial planning was a profession, but San Francisco was certainly probably the best place to figure it out because they've got a really robust professional community, including a lot of very successful fee-only planners. And so that is, I quit the tech industry and decided to get a master's in financial planning locally at Golden Gate University. And that was the start. That was in 2008 or 9.
So you really like to get into career paths like a year before things go belly up.
Yeah. What was funny is I was so oblivious about it that when I got my first job, in the financial planning profession as sort of an intern, it was at the beginning of 2010. And it was only then that I realized that there'd been this big kerfuffle in the markets and the economy had tanked. And,
Coming from the economics major, that is impressive. But I'm assuming you were head down buried in master's work because Golden Gate University has a great program.
Yeah. And I also got, in the 2-year time frame, I got married and we had our first kid and we moved from San Francisco to Virginia. So, I was wrapped up in my own stuff.
Yeah, really nothing going on during that time frame. So I guess, don't really remember how you found out about financial planning, but why a master's degree? I guess, did you explore, just getting a certificate CFP or I guess what made you decide to go the long route and get a master's?
The long, expensive route. Exactly. I come from an academic family. Both of my parents have graduate degrees. My father was, a university math professor for 300 years. Academics is just, it's the default way to do anything is you get a degree in it. And also Golden Gate University being right there in San Francisco where I lived, it was very front and center. And, I didn't really know much else about the career path. I didn't know what other things I could do. And this seemed like a very obvious first step. As I commented to the head of the program at that point, whose name I forget, from a financial perspective, it was the dumbest thing I could have ever done. Because, I quit my job, which was paying good money. I dropped $25,000 for a master's degree just from sort of, opportunity cost perspective. I would have been much better off, probably still would have been much better off if I had just worked for another 10 years as a technical writer and then died of a heart attack because I hated it so much.
Yeah, it's a tough call. I mean, it's really that opportunity cost. Like you said, 2 years, especially whenever you're in a career. I mean, if you go, I got my master's, right after undergrad. And so my opportunity cost was much lower because I'm giving up a $40,000 salary or something that as a new grad. But you gave up probably a 6-figure job or whatnot for 2 years and took a step backwards from a career perspective and sort of made yourself an entry-level person into a career. So you had to have believed this was your calling. I mean, I would assume to make that big of a leap career-wise and personally.
God, I wish I could say I remembered what the hell I was thinking at the time. I really don't. I mean, getting married and becoming a mother just completely obliterated my higher processing powers for a while. I don't really remember, but it was something that really interested me. I mean, it was not a completely new concept to me. I grew up with a dad who watched, Louis Rukeyser's Wall Street Week every Friday night and who had, my father literally kept every trade confirmation from when he started buying mutual funds in the 1970s.
Oh, man. Can actually get his basis, unlike 98% of clients.
Exactly. And so this was, numeracy and comfort with money things was always sort of part of my upbringing. So it wasn't a radical shift in mindset or anything like that. And getting a master's degree just seemed like a sort of a natural thing for me. I'm good at school. I like school. And you know what? Having a master's degree in something makes you more attractive in that industry.
No, I totally agree. So were you working in the financial planning industry at all while getting your master's, or did you just focus on school and then start looking for a job once you finished up?
The latter. I was not working because I actually finished well, that's not true. When I was in San Francisco, I was only in my master's program. I did not work at all in the planning profession in San Francisco. I did a lot of informational interviewing, which was super helpful because, you know, I was clueless about the profession in general and just kind of happened to drop into the fee-only world. And so the other parts of the financial planning industry are still sort of this black box to me.
Me too. So I understand.
Okay, good. I feel weird. Like after 8 years of trying to figure it out, it's still sort of opaque.
I know. I'm still trying to get Kitsis to explain exactly how a broker-dealer works in a way that I understand. I'm just like, I don't get it.
I don't feel so alone then. Yeah, I just felt like this mental block. But I did end up, I started by informational interviewing a couple of Wellesley alumni. My college has a very strong alumni network. And one of them worked for Ameriprise. And I quite liked her. I know the Ameriprise is, a sort of fee-based thing, but she seemed to be like I could identify with her. And then the other one worked for Morgan Stanley and was actually pretty new there, just the first few years. And all I remember, or the biggest thing I remember, was her saying, okay, so you've just gotten married. If you go this route, you need to make sure your husband understands he won't see you for the next 5 years as you get all of your series designations and as you're like out schmoozing and handshaking and trying to get clients. I was like, that sounds so unappealing. I would just like to leave right now. And so thankfully, I just kept on informational interviewing. And, I think I information interviewed Norm Boone at Mosaic, which is, a really successful fee-only, high net worth wealth management shop in San Francisco. And, gradually just got further and further into the professional network there, going to, joining NAPFA and FPA. And it's just a great professional community in the Bay Area. But I never worked there. And then when I was partway through my master's program, my mother's fee-only, like old school fee-only solo RIA shop in Virginia where I'd grown up. This planner was 70 at the time or 69 or something, and she had no succession plan. So very much like the stereotype of that first wave of fee-only advisors. She had worked in the brokerage world. She had worked in an insurance company, finally opened up her RIA. And so she knew very minimal stuff about me, but enough to know that I was, at least competent and not a schmuck. And so she reached out to me and said, hey, well, how would you like to, join my firm, work as an intern with me for a year, and then decide whether or not you want to buy the firm? Wow, that's an amazing offer to someone who's never worked a single day in the profession and is, partway through a master's program. And so that combined with having our first child and wanting to move back to where my parents were, I was like, great, I'll do it. I'll work with you for a year and then make the decision about whether or not to buy the firm. And so that was just sort of a lucky break that I got my first job in a fee-only shop doing, paraplanning stuff, I'd say. The master's degree made me very technically competent, not a lot of the sort of softer, more discernment-oriented skills.
So I'm curious, you use the term informational interview, which I'm not sure I've ever heard that term before. So I'm assuming that is different, that you weren't interviewing for jobs. So were you just cold emailing Norm Boone and saying, hey, do you mind, I'm new in the profession, do you mind sitting down with me and talking to me? Like, was it just information gathering?
Yes to both of those. And, people are, kind of like a reflection of this podcast. People love to talk about themselves. So, I'd contact these people and I'd introduce myself and, say that I was entering the field and would really like to learn more about, how they operate and their perspective on the career and the profession. And people, I interviewed probably 10 people and they were all very gracious about it and encouraging and all that.
That's awesome. I wonder if we could do like 10 episodes with 10 people like Norm, but just from a wide range of the industry, to sort of do like 10 hours of informational interviews so that, folks could hear that. Because I do think you probably got a wonderful breadth of the industry and to understand, I mean, really the industry side, the profession side, the sales side, the advice side, all of that, the folks that were really passionate about what they did, the people that were really just looking to make a buck. I'm not sure I've heard anyone that has done that, but I can imagine that was awesome. I mean, just an awesome learning experience.
It was. And, it was very helpful from the very beginning, with that Morgan Stanley woman. I was like, well, I know an entire section of the industry I want nothing to do with.
Oh, it's so true. Sometimes the best internships or informational interviews are the ones that show you what you do not want to do. So you got this amazing offer, the golden ticket, as it would be called, to go out. And so you and your husband and maybe baby by this point have moved out to Virginia for this job opportunity?
Yeah. And considering the fact that I launched my own firm a year ago, it might be a clue that I ended up not buying this practice. I mean, it was an excellent opportunity. And I look back and I'm ashamed of myself in a way because I did not appreciate all that this woman had done to create a really quite profitable solo practice. I come in, I've got this master's degree and all these ways that she can improve her practice. And, over the last year and a half when I've been, working on starting my own firm, I'm just like, oh my God, I cannot believe I did not remotely appreciate the stress and the effort that went into running your own business. I was really just sort of this ungrateful wretch in some ways.
It's funny that you say that because I feel the same way about my first job. I took the opportunity for granted that I had with Rick Kaler and just didn't understand, why wouldn't you give me equity? That you should just give me equity. I don't understand. And it has taken until I have started, this business and have had new employees or prospective employees ask for equity. And I'm like, screw you. You can't have equity. This is my baby. And I'm like, oh man, I need to apologize to Rick because it's hard. It's hard to know because you sort of see what's built and you may not love it and you want to make updates, but it is helpful. And for listeners that are in that position, take an extra minute and maybe find out why, where it comes from, because you may find that a heck of a lot of sweat and tears went into building something, even if you don't appreciate it. It's good to know where it comes from.
Yeah. And, she provided real value for her clients. Her clients were the kind who after a meeting would hug her and, thank her for making them feel so much better. So she was really providing real value, but in a way that didn't interest me ultimately. She was an active investment manager and a very investment-oriented person serving primarily retirement age clients, which was, her peers. And also that's sort of where the fee-only profession, fee-only part of the profession started, was managing money for more affluent older people. So she was very much just a reflection of her time, but it wasn't very interesting to me from the get-go. So, and especially the active management thing. I remember this one time because we're still thinking maybe I'll buy this practice. And so she needs to sort of teach me how she invests so that I could continue on doing that once I am the owner of the firm. And she would choose, individual stocks in the taxable account and mutual funds in the rest of the accounts. And so she sat down with me one day and said, okay, well, here's this client coming in for her annual review. How would you adjust her portfolio? And so I'd sort of been paying attention to how this woman does things. So I make my best guess. And she comes in and basically just redlines everything and says, no, I would do this, and this other way. And I said, okay, well, how did you make those decisions? What's the logic you use? And she just said, well, basically it's seat of my pants. And I knew at that moment, the thought literally went through my head, well, I can't do that then because it's some idiosyncratic process that isn't replicatable.
I appreciate that she said that instead of trying to make up a methodology just to say this is sort of what feels right to me.
She always backed into it. She made the decision and then she would say, well, I use this metric, that metric, and this other metric. But in another situation, she'd use an entirely different set of metrics. So, it was just sort of a feel built from, years in the industry. But I was already sold on passive investing. And anyways, this led to my first interaction with Michael Kitces, actually. I don't know how I learned about him or how I actually persuaded him to get on a phone with me. But I was really struggling with, should I buy this practice or not? I'm pretty stressed out about going basically $500,000 in debt to buy this practice. And there are these things that don't fit. And so I got on the phone with Michael Kitces. He was driving down the Jersey Turnpike at the time. And He spent a really long time talking to me, which now I understand a lot better.
There's no such thing as a short conversation with Kitsis.
The one thing I really took away from that was you need to have a story for your investment approach. And she sold her clients on an active story. And it kind of doesn't matter what your story is, but you need to have one. And switching stories is really challenging. And it makes it a lot harder for that sort of succession plan to work.
It's a great point. It's really the rise, I think, why DFA has had such amazing success, especially among the fee-only advisors, is it's a great passive story to tell. Sometimes the active story is easier because it's like, oh, like we're using all these metrics and all these things, make all these decisions. And in passive, it's like, we're not going to do anything. So pay us 1% to not do anything. But it is a good, and DFA has taken that to the next level where it's like, we're not going to do anything, but we have these guys that do this really cool stuff. So it's sort of passive, but has this extra layer of coolness to it. But it sells better than, not. So anyway, I agree that having that story to tell is critical.
Yeah, and that's influence, that notion of story has stuck with me beyond just my investment philosophy, but my financial planning philosophy and why you start a business. There are stories behind all of these choices, and it's the stories that people are able to connect to. I'm big on the notion of story.
So you made the decision to not go that route. So what was next for you?
That didn't go over so well with the woman who was trying to sell it to me. But I did stick around, and she ended up being bought by a local fee-only firm who was a whopping 6 people big, which in the RA world meant they're like a mid-sized firm. I stuck with them for a year, and I probably would have stuck longer, except they didn't want me because they were another investment-oriented, fee-only, but, older, retirement age-focused, very investment-focused firm. And again, they brought really good value to their clients. But what I wanted to do simply wasn't a fit. So they kept me for a year to help with the transition. And then the founder of the firm I really appreciate his honesty about we don't have a place for your skill set. He always marveled that I wasn't a CFP. He's like, you know more about financial planning than most CFPs I know. Can't you just tell the CFP board that? I was like, yeah, unfortunately, no, that's not the way it works. So this whole time I'm working part-time because I'm part-time there, part-time stay-at-home mom. So in terms of the CFP progression, like I passed the exam and I got in the classes taken care of, but I'm inching just molasses slow towards the actual 3-year experience requirement. So that was sort of an ongoing frustration and part of the reason why I never really thought about launching my own firm. Like, I can't launch a firm if I don't have my CFP. Like, no one will take me seriously. So anyway, so I left that firm after a year, and then I started doing some contract financial planning, actually for that firm itself, because they'd have financial planning needs, which were a distraction or disruption from their normal process. So they'd actually just farm out these financial planning projects to me. And all of this time when I'm talking about like quitting my own job and spending $25,000 on a master's plan and only working part-time and then basically being laid off from that job, I'm married to a guy who's being paid a very nice salary from the tech industry. So like my entire success in the financial planning industry is because of sort of the largesse of the tech industry and being married to a guy who's in it. Because otherwise I would not have made most of the decisions I made because they didn't put food on the table. Yeah, and then eventually I'm just like, dude, I hate living in Virginia. I didn't like growing up in Virginia. Turns out I don't like living in it as an adult. So we moved. We took a 3-month road trip in a minivan we bought with 2 children, looking for a new place to live, basically, and ended up in Bellingham later. Yeah, it was, I think at the time, mostly horrible because our children were 1 and 4 and we rarely got any sleep.
Now that was an interesting call. 1 and 4 road trip.
Yeah, but we didn't know where we wanted to end up. All I knew is I didn't want to be in Virginia anymore.
Yeah, and how do you make that decision without just trying a few places out? So
So I'm glad I did it. I saw Niagara Falls and Mount Rushmore. And I took my children to Yellowstone, which I would never, ever recommend because I was terrified the entire time standing by all the bubbling pots
I even put Ridge on a leash when I take him to Yellowstone. I'm very anti those like leash backpacks, but it's
when it comes to boiling vats of goo, yeah, you're okay with it.
That they like to jump into because they look pretty. So you saw a lot of really cool stuff. So what was it about Bellingham then? So which is just outside of Seattle, and so or I guess not just outside, but yeah, I guess why there instead of the plethora of other places? What drew you in that area?
Well, I knew I wanted to end up on the West Coast again. Just, lifestyle, culture, politics, food, it all agrees with me much more than anywhere else. I wasn't familiar with Bellingham. My husband was. It's got a great sailing community. And as soon as my husband gets out from under raising these damn children a little more, I'm hopeful he'll get back into sailing. And it's close to his family who live just across the border in Canada. And it's a small enough town that we don't drive our car really much at all. I can bike most places, walk to the kids' school. So it's just a nice place to raise kids, and it's close enough, or, it has enough of the amenities. The one downside of Bellingham is professionally, it's not that robust. So there are really no employment opportunities here for a fee-only financial planner who wants to do financial planning. There are a few financial planning shops, but they're pretty small and they don't need help. And they also practice the way that I don't, serving the retirement set, which is just not my bag. So for a while, I hadn't really thought of launching my own firm, in part because I didn't have my CFP, and also because I am so not an entrepreneur. My father was a tenured professor and my mother was a government employee. Entrepreneurship does not run in my blood. But I did run into enough people just locally who said, "Oh, you're a financial planner. Could you help me?" And I'd have to say, "Well, not for money." And I thought, well, maybe I'll just set up this RIA just on the side, bare minimum sort of framework so that occasionally I can help someone and be paid for it. And that was in the fall of 2015. And during my efforts to figure out how the hell to register with the state, that's when I stumbled upon XYPN. And that sort of changed my whole outlook on things. Because for several years, my husband had been just complaining endlessly about his job. And it's so stressful and pointless and blah, blah, blah. So I was like, hey, this sounds good. You can quit your job. We can earn no money and I can launch my own firm. And so that's eventually how I got to launching my own firm.
You make a really good point about being an entrepreneur, in that financial planning is sort of a unique profession, I think, because you can start a business without being an entrepreneur. You are not going to start a tech company unless you just have that entrepreneurial drive, right? You don't accidentally end up in tech. You don't accidentally start businesses generally. But in financial planning, you really can, if you can start a business for other motivations than just being this intrinsic entrepreneur. And I always found it interesting that when we first started XYPN, the first sort of founding wave of members, or our first wave of founding members, were all entrepreneurs because they all did this on their own and sort of joined us as an afterthought. What I find now is that the majority of our members are not what you would classify as your typical entrepreneur. They're really folks that they have a passion for doing planning. They want to do planning for a certain segment. They don't want to be told when to show up to an office, or that they have to wear pantyhose or a tie. Whatever, or there's just no opportunities. Locally, they want to be able to work virtually. I mean, there's a plethora of reasons, but usually I just want to own a business and build something is not the number one motivator, which I think is really cool, actually.
Yeah, and I never would have started a real business had I not discovered XYPN. I'm one of those people who I basically need someone to hold my hand and walk me through these things, because I'm just not going to figure it out on my own, or there's some block there. I'm too nervous or something. So XYPN was enough of a handhold for me that I had I can just go to this one resource to get help on all aspects of launching and running a financial planning firm. Sweet. I think I can manage that.
Right. It really just takes your time and energy. It's sort of, that's always been our goal, is that, we can answer the questions. I can't force you to do it. I can't force you to actually implement, but we can at least answer the questions, which can spend dozens or hundreds of hours spinning your wheels looking for resources out there. But So we had said before the call, you told me you were 1 year and 1 month in. So you actually launched back in, so that would be May of 2016. I keep forgetting what year it is. This is becoming a problem. I'm becoming my mother. So I hope my mom isn't listening to this episode. So how did it go? I mean, I guess what was the launch process like for you, both from just a business standpoint, but also from an emotional standpoint?
Yeah. So I think one of the things that makes my business perhaps different than at least what I observed to be most XYPN members is that I am entirely virtual. I chose a niche. They do not live where I live. And so everything about running my business has been constrained perhaps or influenced by the fact that everything's virtual. Everything's got to be, all the marketing, all the service, everything has to be virtual. So my launch was, I actually did have a party. It was also my 40th birthday. So I sort of combined the two. But I haven't gotten a single client out of that group of people because they all live here and none of them are women in tech. And so the launch was, I also sent out a bunch of cards to, acquaintances in the tech industry. And, I had set up certain social media accounts, business page on Facebook and LinkedIn. So I announced it there. But I would say the launch was pretty undramatic, shall we say. My big thing was because I knew I was going to have to be doing this virtually. My website was I did not launch until I had a website ready to go. I got registered the second half of April. My website wasn't finished for 2 more weeks. And so I didn't really do anything until my website was up and complete. And that was sort of, I guess, the equivalent of having a giant party where all my potential clients could come and see. I finally had my presence on the web.
So tell me a little bit about your niche. Like how did women in tech come about for you?
Well, actually, at first it was working mothers in tech. And it's not a gigantic leap to figure out how I got there because I used to be in tech. I was a working mother. I could identify with these people. I knew a lot about sort of the financial implications of working in tech, and also the challenges that working mothers have. And so my initial website and tagline and all of that was about, was focused on working mothers. And then a few months in, it became sort of obvious that I was not getting any traction with working mothers in tech. And I had a couple working mothers in tech who I'm friends with say, "We'd love to work with you. We ain't got no time. Like our lives are completely consumed with the whole working mother thing." So I actually did transition to simply women in tech, which is clearly a larger niche, but that's really resonated. As gigantic as that niche is, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of women are in tech. There doesn't seem to be anyone else out there talking to them from the financial planning profession, like in a targeted way. Maybe I just haven't found them yet.
So what is unique about, I guess, so you can say, I focus on women in tech the same way I could say the same thing, but you obviously know this field or know their issues much better than me. So what is it that you know, or what are the pain points that you can help them solve that differentiates you from generalist advisor down the street that can work with anybody?
Sure. Well, there are actually a few categories of things that I think about. One is simply the financial challenges that you run into when you work in tech, or financial opportunities, really. And that's gender independent, like stock options, restricted stock units. My company's going IPO. I've got a really high salary, but I live in a really high cost of living area. Like those are the same whether you're a man or a woman. So that's sort of the tech aspect of things. Woman part of my niche is women, have historically been disserved, is that even a word, by the financial planning profession, like talked down to, condescended to. If you're in a couple, the planner would tend to talk to the husband instead of the wife. And so women tend to feel more comfortable talking with other women about touchy subjects like money. And so that's more of a sort of a communication style and a personality I put out there. I'm pretty casual about most everything. And I think that helps women sort of get over that hurdle of, it's money. This makes me so nervous. And then the women in tech thing, and I think this really is the crux of sort of, where I differentiate myself from other people, is I understand women's position in the tech industry now, which is more and more women are entering it, but there's a wage gap, there's a culture problem. Women are not getting the salaries or the equity or the promotions or the funding that men do. And while I'm not a negotiation expert and I'm not a career coach and I'm not an angel investor, I am aware of those challenges that women have. And I do talk with all of my clients about, well, what's your negotiation history? What do you tend to do, during your annual review or that sort of thing? What's your networking plan? Are you going to networking? Are you increasing your job skills? Are you taking your boss out to lunch, et cetera? So really focusing on the career aspect, because there's so much money in the tech industry and women simply aren't getting their fair share. I mean, if they're not getting their fair share, there's no amount of magic I can do to make up for that.
Yeah, listeners have heard me joke about this before that, I love getting the question at conferences, like, what do you do for young people? Like, what is this financial planning thing you do? And it always makes me laugh because you helping, female tech executive or engineer get a $20,000 salary increase to get her to, average salaries of the men in her department or whatever that is. If it's $10,000, $20,000, raising that base salary is a forever compounding effect, because anytime you put your previous salary history down, you sort of tend to build on that. That is dramatically better than, hey, we saved you $300 on your tax return. Like, we tend to focus on the expense side and not the income side. And yet the income side is, one, it's a lot more fun to talk about. Like, hey, you need to spend $500 a month less is a crappy conversation. Hey, I'm going to help you make $500 more so you don't have to cut spending by $500 is a much more fun conversation. And it has very long-lasting, long-term compounding effects.
Exactly. Yeah. The women I work with tend to be really enthusiastic about the tech industry, despite the crap they might have to endure in it because they're a woman. So I really like riding the coattails of these women who are making strides and are really passionate about their career. Because when I was in tech, I simply wasn't passionate. Now that I'm a financial planner, I can identify with that. Like, oh, this is a job I actually really enjoy. So it's fun to be a part of that ride for a lot of these women.
So how are these clients finding you? Is it really just through online marketing? Is it through other financial advisors hearing that, like, you're the female tech advisor, so we'll send our prospects to you? I guess, how's that? Where are they finding you?
Yeah, I've had bupkis basically in terms of success from other financial planners referring to me. I mean, maybe it'll happen in the future. But I am glad you asked the question about how clients are finding me, because despite XYPN's talk about, like, oh, we're virtual, we're all virtual planners, in my experience, everyone I talk to, they get their first umpteen clients locally, right? The whole 1,000 cups of coffee thing, go to networking events, et cetera, et cetera. Like, that simply is not available to me. So it was entirely online marketing. I mean, I had a blog from day one. And so I found, where does my target demographic live online? Like, I can't meet them at the coffee shop, but I can meet them in this Facebook forum, for example, for women in tech. And so I joined these, not a huge number of them, but a few, I think entirely Facebook forums targeted at women in the tech industry, and just start participating in the discussions. And when I wrote a blog post that I thought was particularly salient, I would post it there as a resource. One of those forums was for my college alumni network. And that was the first, I didn't get any friends and family clients initially, which was really stressful because a lot of people in my study group, my launcher group, their first 5 clients were all friends and family. And I'm like, I don't have anyone. But the Wellesley network was my equivalent of that, because much like with friends and family, being a Wellesley alumna just sort of got over that trust hurdle, which is the biggest hurdle when working with a financial professional, is just trusting them. And so my very first client, which was, I think, 2 weeks after I launched, was a young couple, 26 years old, woman and husband in tech. Woman was a Wellesley alumna. And I kind of forget who came after that. But Wellesley was a good source of 3 of my first 6 clients were Wellesley alumni. And then just repeatedly showing up in these online forums and participating in conversations, providing blog posts. But, I think by the end, I launched in May. By the end of the year, I had maybe 5 clients, which I was like, that's not bad. But nor am I knocking it out of the park. And I will just gloss over the next few months and then say in February or March, I seem to have hit some sort of tipping point where I had been participating in these forums enough people knew my name, knew what I was about, that I started getting prospect, requests for these, free consultations from people I'd never heard of before, and the people who had referred them to me I'd also never heard of before.
Which is a really cool feeling.
Yeah, I know. That was pretty exciting when I think the first woman said, "Yeah, some woman just mentioned you in our all women Slack channel at work." I was like, "That is sweet. Something's working." And so that built on itself. So, but period of time that I glossed over from December, January, February, I was not growing. I was not getting a ton of, like in December and January, I don't know if I get any prospects. And that was my abyss of that was my pit of despair time. And I will say that it took me 10 months basically since launch to get to a point where I was getting traction from my marketing efforts. And it was really hard because there's just not any instant gratification there. There's not even soon gratification.
Yeah, that's a long play marketing strategy for sure.
Right. And a lot of people are like, oh yeah, blogging, it's long play. You should back burner that and work on, other more direct marketing methods, except I didn't have any because all of my clients live away from me.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that about sort of that December to February timeframe, because that pit of despair, I don't know of any entrepreneur that hasn't gone through it. Sometimes it's shorter, sometimes it's longer, sometimes we never get out of it. Sometimes, in the ways we get out of it are very different, but it's something to be aware of. It really is that iceberg metaphor that, you only see the top 10% of what we'll call quote unquote success. You don't see the 90% under the water that went to that success. And part of that 90% is going through the emotional roller coaster that is entrepreneurship. This is not an easy ride, and shame on me and anyone at XY Planning Network if we ever give the illusion that it is. It's certainly something that we try to address on this podcast and maybe can continue to do a better job, is that it's never easy. I don't care if you're coming over with $20 million in assets and $200,000 in revenue. You ask those folks that have done that, and it wasn't an easy road. It was a tough road, and it just always is. There's no easy path here. So I guess what was your motivator for sticking with it? If December, January, you're not getting clients, you're feeling like, this isn't working, I guess why put one foot in front of the other instead of, going and taking a $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 job at a firm, in your neighborhood?
Well, for one, there is no $60,000 or $80,000 job in my firm.
Well, that helps. There's no temptation.
Yeah, there's not a lot of alternative, really. And I would say for a solid week in January, I stopped putting one foot in front of the other. It was not quite fetal position in the corner, but it was one step removed. I canceled all the meetings I had for an entire week, and I spent a lot of time kind of crying and lying on my bed and just thinking this can't possibly work. And so I would like to make a few endorsements. I would like to endorse getting a therapist, and I would like to endorse having a business coach, and I would like to endorse having a spouse who is incredibly patient and has more faith in you than you do yourself, because those are the 3 people in my life who got me through that. And coming out of that, it's really, for me, exercise has been a big help. I've always been an exerciser, but I realize that I literally need to exercise every morning. Not 5 mornings a week like the doctors recommend, but every morning. So I start the day with some sense of accomplishment and strength.
That's a really great recommendation.
Yeah, it might be something different for other people, but exercise is what did it for me. And that's I'm very aware of how much it helps me on a daily basis. I'm tuned into whether I'm feeling confident or not, and how exercise fits into that. But yeah, it was, I just didn't know whether I could make this work, and having no alternative professionally just made it all the worse. And here we are living on savings. And I also want, I've got 2 little girls, and I really was putting a lot of pressure on myself, I still do, wanting to model for them that, hey, mommy can own her own business and manage money and be the boss and blah, blah, blah. And I remember my therapist saying, you should focus a little bit more on modeling self-care, because what you're modeling is going to end up modeling a heart attack. And that's not something you want to model for your daughters. So that really stuck with me, the need to do self-care. And I have to say, there were a lot of things. It was not just that I wasn't getting prospects. It was winters suck in the Pacific Northwest. Days are short, gloomy, and dark. The presidential election just kind of cast a pall on my world. All the people in my community would just, our coping mechanisms just sort of took a permanent hit, it seemed. So there's just a lot of things happening at the same time. And I realized that I really need to replenish myself every day. And for me, the exercising was that replenishment.
I've seen some articles recently. I'm not sure if a study just got done and they were all referencing it. I tend to skim articles, but pulling out a couple of the highlights. One, but around entrepreneurship is that we tend to, when we start a business, we tend to let ourselves physically and mentally go. We don't have very good sleep habits. We don't have very good exercise habits. We tend to gain weight. There's a lot of things that go into that. And I can speak to that as well, that when I started my business is actually when I started doing CrossFit. And just to try to get healthy and stay healthy. And, especially when you work virtually and you maybe don't see humans all day, it's a great way to at least go get some level of human interaction. But you really do need to take care of yourself. You cannot take care of your clients if you don't take care of yourself first. And that's both physically, mentally, spiritually, investing in your relationship. So my recommendation for advisors that are looking to start a business is put all of that stuff on your calendar before you start booking client meetings. Put the exercise on there, put date nights, put going to church or whatever your choice is there, put therapy or meditation, however you're going to take care of your mental health, hiking. Whatever it is for you, put it on the calendar so it gets done. And the results can just be absolutely amazing for what taking care of yourself really can contribute to your business.
Yeah. And considering that I wasn't taking enough care of myself and I was a complete useless mess for an entire week, I was like, well, pretty much anything's going to be an improvement on this. So
any idea, was there something that happened, get a big quote in the Wall Street Journal or something that sparked it in March, or that was just the tipping point in terms of time that you had been doing the marketing for long enough that it started to gain traction?
Yeah, I think it was long enough. It was just being at it long enough. And also one of the Facebook forums I got into was a forum called Tech Ladies, associated with the company Hire Tech Ladies, as in give them a job. I joined that forum pretty soon after it started, and it just blew up. I think I was someone in the hundreds when I joined, and now it's 11,000 people a year later. So I get to be the voice of finances in that community.
Because you were first in, yeah.
Yeah. So, I've given a webinar through that community about stock options, and I'm giving another one in September about, 401ks. So that was, some combination of luck and me trying to find these places online where the community lives.
So one of the things that you mentioned was giving a shout out to your business coach. So you had gratefully, or I should say, we are grateful that you graciously is the word I'm looking for. You graciously wrote an article for the XY Planning Network blog, which we can link to in the show notes, but about your journey to finding a business coach. So I guess what was it that made you decide that you felt like you needed it? And just a little bit about sort of the journey to finding someone that would be a good accountability partner for you.
Yeah. It was actually an XY Planning podcast with Daniel Wren, I think, that was the cause. And in it, he said something like his goal was to be the premier regional firm, wherever the hell he lives, for doctors. And I thought, that sounds like a nice goal to have. I would like to be the premier financial planning firm for women in tech. And I have no idea how to get there. I've never started a business before in my life. So, that goal might as well be on Mars as far as I'm concerned. And then I thought, hey, I think there are people out there who do this, who help me get there. So that was why I realized I wanted a business coach. I was pretty sure, at least, even though I wasn't specifically sure about what business coaches did. And so that started my journey. And then I asked in the VIP forum on Facebook for recommendations for business coaches, got a lot of recommendations, chose 5, interviewed all 5, in part just to sort of triangulate on what the hell is a business coach and what can I expect by working with one. And also, investigating the different personalities. So it was very much, a large part of the value I've gotten out of this whole process is, this is exactly what our clients go through trying to find a financial planner. They don't know what a financial planner does, what the different options are, what the personalities are, what the process will be. So how I communicate with clients and prospects has been heavily shaped by my search for a coach and also my work with my coach.
So it's a good point that around personality, because same with our clients and us as financial advisors, and this, for us searching for a business coach, personality is paramount. Because I look at business coaching. Tell me if you sort of have a different view on this, but I look at business coaching very much as an accountability partner. There are things they can teach you, but you can go find all that information, just like our clients can go find all the information on the internet, but that's not what's helpful. What's helpful is having someone that can really synthesize all that information that's out there, bring to us what's applicable, and just be there to say like, hey, you said you're going to do 3 or you're going to do 3 networking events last week, or you were going to, participate in these forums or whatnot. Like, did you do it? I don't know. Is that sort of been your experience is more on the accountability side?
Yes, a large part of this accountability, I would say almost a larger part, though, is clarity. And you kind of are getting at that with, I could go read 100 business books and Google till the cows come home and get lots of data about how to run a financial planning business. But how to figure out what is the one thing that I should be focusing on now. Because I got overwhelmed. I had 1,000 ideas in my head at any one moment and making very little progress on any of them. And I remember during my prospect call with Elizabeth, whom I ended up choosing and working with, just in the prospect call, I'm going over all these awesome ideas I have, like, I'd love to write an ebook and I'd love to start a podcast and this and the other. And she said, those are great ideas. And I think those should be maybe stage 2. And stage 1 should be just getting some clients. I was like, yes, excellent point. And just something at that level, because I'd just gotten so distracted by all the shiny objects out there. And that's what she provides to me on a regular basis. And also because she herself had run a successful RIA for so many years, I actually do get sort of financial planning professional practice stuff from her. Like, what do you do in an annual review meeting when it's not all about investments? Because frankly, I'd never had that experience before. And she and I could talk through that.
So your coach is, you mentioned Elizabeth Jaton. And so folks can find her. She's based out of Atlanta, I believe. Very successful as a RIA owner and now does business coaching. But her business coaching is obviously a little different because she has been a financial planner. There's certainly a ton of value in actually having been on that side of the table. So was it really personality and sort of that experience that attracted you to Elizabeth versus, I'm assuming you interviewed 5 highly qualified business coaches that could do great things with you. Was it just sort of that attitude? I guess, was there sort of a thing that made you realize, okay, yeah, she's the right coach for me?
There were a few things. She communicates in a way that makes me feel very understood. She is an excellent example of someone who just shuts up most of the time. She's, from what I understand of active listening, she's an excellent active listener. She'll just let me blather on, and then she'll repeat back to me sort of the crux of what I have just said, and then give her, her thoughts on that thing. But most of the time I'm talking, and I get, at the start of every meeting, she'll say basically, hey, Meg, I've got some things that I want to talk with you today, but what are the few things that you want to be sure to talk about today, and we will cover those first. So I am basically always in the driver's seat. So I make sure that nothing's still hanging over my head at the end of any meeting. Okay, so there was that. Even in our prospect call, I felt that level of being listened to, being heard, being understood. And then she followed up with written notes that were an extension of that, sort of writing down, here are the things you brought up that you're thinking about or struggling with. Here's where you are in your business. And here are my thoughts about where you might go from here. So just the prospect interaction. I was like, I am already getting value from this woman. I'm not even paying her. We've had a 40-minute conversation. Wow, this bodes really well for what I'm going to get out of the relationship when we actually work together. And I will also say that before our prospect call, she sent me a couple of documents, one of which outlined very clearly her services and fees. And the other one was a list of challenges or things that she'd helped other clients and firms with. And that really helped me put some specificity on around what a business coach does, because I was pretty vague about it. And that's something I've actually tried to do in my business. Like, I have a document now I can send to prospects of, here's what Meg does. Like, here is literally the kind of service and value you will get out of working with me. Because I just found that so useful, because coaching, just like financial planning, is this sort of this ill-defined, ill-regulated, amorphous service that you think you need, but it's a lot of money. And I would like some sort of reassurance that it's going to be worth it to pay for it.
You know, just thinking back to a lot of our advisors that have had a lot of success in terms of just really high close rates or, sign up rates among prospective clients. One of the common themes that I hear is giving value in that prospective client meeting, and that it's not just about like, tell me what you need and I'll tell you what I do. It's, hey, let me show you. One, let me demonstrate the value I can provide you. Let me show you how I've given value to other clients, and just sort of allow that demonstration of value, and don't be afraid to give it away for free. It's okay, because they're going to see that value and want to pay you for this thing we call financial planning. Because to your point, most people don't know what we do. And it's a great analogy with a business coach, because we don't know what business coaches do until you see it and experience it. And now you're sold and a huge advocate of it.
Absolutely. Yeah. So my prospect process changed as a result of my work with Elizabeth. It's actually pretty time consuming. The call is, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, however long it takes. But then I do write up these, very attractive looking, formatted notes afterwards that usually run about 3 pages. And part of it's just recapping what they've told me, their sort of objective information about their life and their finances. Some of it's reflecting back, questions I ask about what is your ideal vision for a financial planner, or what are your concerns about working with a financial planner? And then there's a big section on like my thoughts on your situation and what I would probably focus on first if I were you.
Have you seen success with that sort of new perspective follow-up process?
I feel as if I have. I am horrible at tracking metrics, but I've certainly gotten a lot of people saying, wow, thank you. That is awesome. I mean, people have interviewed other financial planners, especially, if they go to Merrill Lynch or something like that for a prospect meeting. Like, I've never had anyone else do this for me.
That's all. It's a great way to differentiate yourself. It's just basically you're just telling them they were heard.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And it's an amazing feeling. Like, we all know that person that makes us feel heard. And if that's going to be your financial advisor, what a great way, considering usually in financial planning, we're just made to feel like idiots as a client in the process. And it's just a tough concept, a tough topic, which is money. So to be able to have that sort of better connection with your financial advisor is huge, I think.
I have certainly experienced that. Yeah. So the relationships are really gratifying to have.
So you're 13 months in. What is the next year bringing for you? Sort of what have you outlined as sort of your goals over the next 12 months that you want to be able to accomplish from a professional perspective or even a personal perspective as well?
Yeah, you asked that question as if I've actually have a plan.
We'll have Elizabeth on to tell us what you told her your plan was.
Yeah, well, she's mentioned now, like, all right, next meeting, we're going to set some goals for the rest of the year. And then the next meeting comes around and I've got some like fire drill that I need her to help me with. I think actually hiring some help is sort of tops on my list right now, because I am getting significantly more interest than I can service at this point.
Wow, that's a big change in 4 months. That's huge.
It is. It's been very, very quick. And, to be fair, the reason I can't service that many people is because the upfront process is pretty intensive. I do a comprehensive sort of planning process upfront. So I really can only take on 2, maybe 3 new clients a month. But, I'm having a couple of prospect calls every week, I would say. I don't know what my conversion rate is, but again, I feel as if it's pretty good.
Well, one, just increasing the number of prospective calls, like I said, getting more at-bats increases the opportunity to get hits. So having that along with a structured process and just some practice, that's the other thing I don't think we talk enough about is that, you have to practice selling yourself, and just more prospective client meetings is an opportunity to just get better at communicating with, prospective clients about what you do.
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely gotten better at that, and I've raised my prices in part because I can, and in part because I'm like, wow, this takes a lot of work. So yeah, I'm telling prospects now that I'm not starting with new clients until September. And I have told enough prospects that, and enough of them have been like, great, see you in September. I'm like,
September's going to be scary.
I know Lyndon Cornett, for example, has a wait list with no particular time frame on it. So I'm like, wow, maybe that's a great idea. But the reaction I get, the first time I told someone who wanted to work with me, great, I'd love to work with you in 3 months. And I was so like nail biting. But for the most part, people have reacted exactly the way that I wanted them to. There's the, wow, that is such a great demonstration of work-life balance, and I should really enjoy the summer with my children too. I'd love to start with you in September. Or, wow, that really demonstrates that you are thinking about how to best serve your clients, and that makes me feel really good about the kind of service I'm going to get as a client. So yeah, see you in September. I'm like, whoa, this worked out a lot better than I thought it was going to.
So is your plan then to try to hire some help going into September? Or do you think that once the kids are back in school, sort of summer's over, you'll have enough time to really be able to bring on these clients and work with them?
Oh, no, I still want to hire some help, which is a complete black box to me. It's just a mystery, and it's incredibly stressful to even think about it because I have no idea of any aspect of it. I think Anna Sagunina is going to give a session on it at the at XYPN 17, and I'm totally going to that session. And I, of course, will be talking with Elizabeth about doing it because clearly she's done that in her past. But yeah, so I'm going to hire some help, and that's pretty much as far as the plan is.
Makes sense. Yeah, hiring's, we could do some more episodes just around that hiring process. I know we've been evaluating building some hiring resources for XYPN members because many of you are growing to the point that you're hitting that pain point of, okay, it's time, and not necessarily just part-time help, handling bookkeeping or 5 hours a week of paraplanning. Like looking like we actually need some real help for the long term.
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, I'm looking at that 5 hour a week paraplanner hire at this point. I'm not thinking at this point of a full-time staff member.
Yeah, my prediction, and you can let me know if I was right or wrong here in about 6 months, or I guess 8 months, but whenever you have them on board for just a couple of months, you're going to be like, yeah, I could use you full-time.
You know what? Totally buy you some tasty beverage if that is the case, because that's going to be good news for me.
Yep, exactly. Always a good thing. Well, Meg, thank you so much for coming on the show to sort of share your journey with this first year and being open and honest about the fact that it hasn't been all rainbows and unicorns, as sometimes we're guilty, and me most of all can be guilty of showcasing just the good and not necessarily the hardships. As we're sort of wrapping up, ask you the question, and that is, if there's one thing that you wish you could go back and tell your former self or your younger self, maybe the Meg that was looking at starting an RIA, if there's one piece of advice you would go back and give yourself, what do you think that piece of advice would be?
I would, to the Meg who actually had the idea of launching a full-fledged firm and was starting down that road, I would give the advice to take care of yourself every day and just create a support network and structure in your life, both people and processes that are going to support you on a daily basis, because this is going to grind you into the earth otherwise. Yeah, that's really cheery, I know, but I learned that the hard way.
Yep. If you could have bypassed learning that and sort of already knew it, I can imagine that would have made the first 6 to 8 months a little bit easier on you. Well, Meg, thanks again for taking the time to be on the show. I really do appreciate you coming on and sharing your journey with us.
You're welcome. Thank you.
A big shout out to this month's sponsor, RICP. Sign up for a demo of RICP's innovative financial planning software at RICPapital.com and mention the XYPN Radio podcast to be eligible for 10% off retail pricing. Be sure to join our VIP community at xyplanningnetwork.com/VIP to hang out with other XYPN Radio listeners, ask questions for future mailbag episodes with myself and Kitsis, and to finally find a community of like-minded financial advisors. Thanks so much for joining me today. We'll see you next time.
You're not alone, and you're not crazy. It's scary starting, building, and growing your own financial planning firm. And that's why we put together a free private community just for you, the Cutting Edge Financial Planner. Go to xyplanningnetwork.com/VIP or text XYPN Radio to 33344 and join a network of thousands ready to change the lives of Gen X and Gen Y clients.